All right, so we talked last time about covalent bonds, and the key word for covalent is co. Co means to share. Like if you cooperate, cohabitate, that collaborate, that just means there's sharing between those outer energy electrons. And what do we call those outer energy electrons? Do you remember? What's the word? Valence, yeah, valence electrons. Those are the ones that interact and are required for bonding between two atoms. So we have these outer energy level electrons. What is the goal for every energy level other than the first one in terms of number of electrons before they're stable and non-reactive? Do you remember how many electrons we need? Right. The first energy level can hold 2 electrons. Every energy level after that can hold 8. So if I know the atomic number, I can predict how many valence electrons there are. For example, sodium. What's the atomic number of sodium? What? Atomic number for sodium is? Say it a little louder. I heard somebody say it. 11, thank you. So if I have an atom of sodium, I'm going to have 2 in the first energy level, 8 in the second energy level, and how many in the outer energy level to get 11 electrons? 1. Because remember, the atomic number tells us that an atom of sodium has 11 electrons and 11 protons, right? So that tells us where I can put my electrons based on, filling my outer shells, or filling the shells from the innermost shell to the outermost. So it'd be 2 in the first, 8 in the second, and 1 in the outer energy level. And that's what we can see here. So there's 2, and then there's 8 in the second energy level, and then there's that 1 out there. So there's 2 major types of bonds we see in the molecules that we encounter in our daily lives that hold them together, and that's ionic bonds and covalent bonds. So covalent just means those outer energy level electrons are sharing their electrons. So a hydrogen atom has an atomic number of 1, so we know that it has 1 proton in the nucleus, which we can see as a plus sign in this diagram, and then it has 1 electron in the outer energy level. And I think I can make this a little bigger even. There. So there's 1 electron in that outer energy level. So if they hover near each other, those electrons can kind of migrate back and forth among energy levels, and it feels like there's 2 in that outer energy level, which is full. The first energy level can hold 2. So that's a covalent bond. Now, nonpolar covalent bond means equal sharing. So the key word to remember with the word nonpolar, it means equal sharing of those electrons. So neither atom feels like it's charged or has more of the electrons than the other. It's equal sharing, so these are non-charged molecules, nonpolar covalent bonds. Polar covalent, there's still sharing going on, but one atom is a little more selfish, a little more hungry for that electron that's being shared, so it pulls the electron a little closer to it and away from the other atoms. So if we look at oxygen and hydrogen, we can see that hydrogens have that little symbol, kind of looks like an S, it's a Greek symbol. They have a positive charge because the electron that they have in their outer energy level that they're sharing with oxygen is being pulled slightly closer to oxygen. So if an atom loses negative charge, what's the net charge on that atom if it's losing negativity? How do we feel in our moods if we lose negativity? You feel more positive. So that's what's going on with the hydrogen atoms. They're slightly positive because the electron is being pulled a little more toward oxygen. And how does oxygen feel if it's gaining that negative electron? It's a little more, if it gains electronegativity, it's gaining negativity, and it's going to be slightly negative. And that's why it has that symbol. So this is not nonpolar, it's unequal sharing. So these are slightly charged particles. And what is the significance of water being polar covalent? Well, it's slightly charged. It attracts other molecules of water. So when I stick my finger in a glass of water and I pull it up, the water molecules stick to each other, and water sticks to surfaces. And that's really important when we talk about how does water get from the soil up the roots, in the roots of the tree, and up the stem to the leaves where it's used for photosynthesis. It's this sticky water process. Water evaporates off the surface of the leaves, and it causes water to draw up through this tree by capillary action. So when we look at the importance of polar covalent molecules, is that they're slightly charged and they can be involved in chemical reactions. And in the case of water, it's what holds water together. It's what keeps water at the surface, is the stickiness. Do you ever see those little water slider bugs at a marsh in the summertime? The fact that they can skim across the surface is because water is sticky to itself, and it creates this thin film of these polar covalent molecules sticking to one another. And that's really important for the way water functions in our bodies, outside of our bodies. Very important. It's called surface tension when we talk about the stickiness of water molecules on the surface of a liquid. Like another example is you put a glass of icy lemonade on the glass patio table, and you try to pick it up, and it kind of sticks, doesn't it? The glass and the water sticks because of adhesion. When water sticks to other things, we call it adhesion. When it sticks to itself, we call it cohesion. So those are both examples of covalent bonds, whether it's nonpolar, non-charged, or polar, slightly charged. They're both covalent bonds where the outer energy level electrons are sharing those electrons, are sharing their locations. Ionic bonds are stronger than covalent bonds. These bonds are harder to break. So when these atoms that have outer energy levels that are not complete, like sodium, and then you take a chloride atom, what is the atomic number of chloride based on the diagram we see here? How many electrons does chloride have? Can you count the little dots around chloride? Not the red one, though. Just look on the left side of this equation. How many yellow dots are there for chloride? Yep, there's 2 in the first energy level, and then 8, right? And 7, so 17. So there's 17 electrons. So how many are in the outer energy level for chloride? Okay. So how many does chloride need to be stable? How many electrons does chloride need to complete that outer energy level? 1. So what do you think requires more energy? If we're going to gain or lose valence electrons, would it take more energy to lose 7 electrons or to gain 1 electron to get 8? Gain 1, yeah. So we usually see when it's 3 or less, they're going to gain those. And this atom, what do you think for this one? Is it easier to gain 7 or to lose the 1 and then drop down to the second energy level and be full? So this one little lonely electron in that outer energy level, if it gives it up to chloride, then the next outer energy level here, the second one, is full with 8, and those become the valence electrons. So what do you think? Lose, right? So what happens when an atom of sodium loses an electron? What happens to the charge on sodium? Because sodium's atomic number is 11, meaning there's 11 protons, 11 electrons. Now it lost 1, so it has 10 electrons, 11 protons. What's the net charge? Positive 1, right? It's got 11 positive charges, 10 negative charges, so it has a +1 charge. So we give the symbol next to sodium a positive charge, so it's Na+. And that's what we call a cation. A cation is just simply an atom that's lost an electron and formed an ionic bond with another atom. And it could be 3 electrons that it lost. It doesn't matter. But a cation is always positively charged because it lost electrons. When we lose negative particles, that atom is more positive as a result because the protons aren't going anywhere. The protons are stuck in the nucleus. And if you can work with protons and change them in the nucleus, then you've just created the H-bomb. and disseminated large parts of countries. So we don't mess around with protons. We just move around with electrons, right? So sodium is a soft, silvery gray metal when it's all by itself. Sodium metal, as it exists, like this, with that one outer energy level electron, is a silvery metal that's violently reactive with water. If you put a chunk of sodium in water, it'll blow the water out and create a fiery reaction. Chloride, when it exists out in nature, is a gas. It's a greenish, yellowish, poisonous gas. So we don't see them unbound in nature because there's a lot of sodium around. So when sodium and chloride gas encounter each other out in nature, they form sodium chloride, which is a sodium ion and a chloride ion forming a covalent bond between them. So when that one electron goes to chloride, it forms a very strong bond called an ionic bond. And we find this occurring between metals and nonmetals in the periodic table. Do you remember where the nonmetals are and the metals in your periodic table? What? Well, I'm going to see that I don't think I included a picture of the periodic table. Oh, I did. I didn't include them all, though. Let's see. I'll just steal one from the internet here. Here's a nice one to look at. So if I look at this picture here, the nonmetals are to the right. See this kind of zigzag line here that comes down here? The nonmetals are to the right of that. So carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, these that are kind of border the zigzag staircase here, those are transition metals. But the true nonmetals are these here. So carbon through fluorine, these are the nonmetals, and everything to the left of that are metals. So these are all metals. So the ones on the far end are called the noble gases because if you look at their atomic numbers, 2, 10, 8, 36, 54, and 86, if we map that out and put those in our energy levels, we would see that their outer energy level was full with 2 or 8. 2 in the case of helium, everything else would have 8. So they're non-reactive because they have stable outer energy levels. And that's what makes an ion, or an atom, sorry, form an ion, is when they lose or gain electrons because they have incomplete energy levels. So going back to our notes then, this bond between sodium and chloride is the result of a transfer of electrons. One atom is losing, one atom is gaining. And we can predict the charge based on how many were lost or gained. If we look at the charge on chloride, chloride gained how many electrons? 1. So it has a charge of -1. But it's like in algebra, we don't write -1. We don't write -1x, right? We just put -x. So in the case of our charges, if it's just 1 electron that's gained or lost, we just put 1 plus or minus charge. But if it's more than 1, then we would say +2 or -2 to indicate how many electrons were gained or lost. So that's, those are ionic bonds. And they always occur between a metal and a nonmetal. If we look at covalent bonds, we see that in water. Water is, or hydrogen is one of those that can kind of be a metal or a nonmetal. It just depends. It's one of those unclear atoms. But if you look at a lot of other covalent compounds, they're between carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Where are those on the periodic table? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. To the right, on the far right. So carbon is atomic number 6. Oxygen is atomic number 8, so it's further over on the right. They're both nonmetals. So we see covalent bonds occurring between nonmetals. So all the food you eat, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, those are all covalently bonded. They're weaker bonds. So that way, when you eat those things, that you're breaking the bonds and releasing the energy from them. So if we look at sodium chloride then, we take away all the water, those ions form a solid crystal, and they have a specific, structure to them based on those sodium and chloride atoms bonded together. But if I throw them in water, the sodium and chloride kind of just swim around. It takes away their structure, their stable solid structure, where they're in fixed positions, and now they're in a liquid state of matter. But can I get the solid back if I have salt water? Can I get the salt back? Yeah, just evaporate off the water, right? You ever see someone, or maybe yourself, if you've ever been crying or your eyes were watering due to a bad cold, or your nose is running, you get a little mark of white salt from your tears or your secretions from your nose. That's just the evaporation and that solid ionic compound showing itself. But if we break that bond, does it change the property of the atoms? What do we use sodium chloride for? Sprinkle it on our food, right? But if I break the ionic bond and I have my silvery metal highly reactive with water, which is sodium, in its elemental form, in a non-bonded form, and I take chlorine gas, which is deadly if we inhale it, not good. But you form that ionic bond, it changes the chemical properties of the compound, and now you have a completely safe substance, which is salt, which we have a lot in our own body fluids. So ionic bonds change the chemical properties of the compound. So when we look at them dissolved in water, what happens is water molecules, that's what these red and white structures are, those water molecules surround the chloride ion, and it separates them from each other. But they're still available. Once the water goes away, they bond back and become a solid. So this is what ionic compounds look like in liquid. We have ions that are free to move around, and they can leave the environment. If this was a cell, sometimes sodium can completely leave this environment and go off and do things throughout the body because it's separate in a liquid environment. Water is the solvent. The solvent is the dissolving substance. So if I look at chloride, for example, what parts of the water molecule are facing chloride versus what parts of the water molecule are facing sodium? Opposites attract, right? So what is the charge? Say, let's look on sodium. What did we say the charge was on this? What atom is this? You tell me. The red. Oxygen. And what did we say the charge was on oxygen? It was slightly, what is it? Slightly positive or slightly negative? It's slightly negative. So that's why it's attracted to the positive charge of the sodium atom. And then if I look at the chloride, what are the two white structures here in this molecule? Hydrogen, and we know hydrogen is slightly what? Positive, yeah, positive, and that's opposites attract, so that part of the water molecule is oriented toward the chloride atom. So kind of like surrounds them and separates these ions when they're in a liquid solution. And again, the benefit of that is these ions have different properties, and they can transmit electrical signals, and they're an important part of our nervous system and muscle contraction. And we see them in other organs or organisms as well. So ionic bonds, very, very important to function within the body. Hydrogen bonds, like I said, I didn't say actually, but water molecules I did say were attracted to each other, right? Because you have negativity on that oxygen atom, and nearby water molecules have negative hydrogen atoms. Slightly positive hydrogen atoms. So they're attracted to each other. So again, if I go back and look at this diagram here, so this is slightly positive, this is slightly negative. So if this water molecule comes in contact with another water molecule, which it does, the oxygen of this molecule would be attracted to the hydrogen of a nearby molecule, forming again this skin that we see that forms with water because water sticks to itself. And the type of bond formed between one water molecule and another is called a hydrogen bond. So if we look at, let's see, water, what makes it special because of those hydrogen bonds, it's cohesive behavior. So you should know what that means. When water is cohesive, it sticks to itself. So water molecules are attracted to other water molecules. The hydrogen atom of one water molecule is attracted to the what atom of a nearby? See if you're following along. Anybody? The hydrogen atom of one molecule, water molecule, be attracted to the what of another water molecule? The oxygen, because the hydrogen is positive, slightly positive, and the oxygen is slightly negative. Opposites attract. Okay, so they're cohesive. They stick together. They form a skin on the Earth's surface in the water bodies. Ability to moderate temperature. It takes a lot of energy to change water from a liquid to a gas. So because of that, our water stays liquid even though it's freezing temperatures. Or your body temperature is 98.6 and you're able to go outside and go ice fishing, skiing, walking on a 10 below day. You don't freeze, right? Because it takes a lot of energy to freeze water, which is what we are mostly made up of. That's the #1 molecule in the body, and our body weight is mostly water. So it's able to moderate temperatures. Just like in the springtime, you can be out in shorts and a t-shirt ice fishing in March, right? In late March when there's a beautiful day, the ice doesn't melt that fast because it takes a lot of energy again to raise the temperature of that ice and get it to melt. So it's really good at moderating temperatures in the Earth especially. So our oceans moderate the Earth's temperature. Expansion upon freezing. We know that if you freeze something, do you ever do that? Freeze water in a water bottle and then it like explodes out the surface or cracks your water bottle, right? So we know that water expands as it becomes solid and freezes. And the benefit of that is we have a solid surface of ice over our lakes and stream, well, depending on how fast the stream is flowing, but we have this solid surface that's kind of protective on the top. And then the life can exist underneath, right? So as it loses its temperature on the surface, it expands. That energy is contained in the solid surface of the water, and it takes energy to do that. So as it expands, it contains everything below. Because if we froze from the bottom up, you know, all of our fish and frogs in the wintertime would cease to exist. So they can live down in the deeper parts of the lake. And its versatility as a solvent. Water is the #1 solvent, which means chemical reactions occur in a watery solution. And we see that, you know, in a lot of organisms that are mostly water as well. So the word cohesion, adhesion, surface tension. Cohesion is within the water molecule itself. So water molecules stick to each other. So this water molecule sticks to this water molecule, and this one sticks to this one, and this one sticks to this one. So these little dashed lines represent hydrogen bonds, and this is an example of cohesion. A drop of water is an example of cohesion. But now if I put this water in a glass container, the water will stick to the edge. You ever remember from your chemistry classes or physical science, the meniscus? If I look at fluid in a graduated cylinder, for example, that's the knee. Let's look at water. If I pour water into a container, it forms a slight little concave. It kind of climbs up the sides of the glass container or the test tube. See this here, same thing. So when I'm measuring this volume, I always measure the bottom of that curve that water makes in a container. That's the accurate way to measure water, is the bottom of the meniscus. Mercury, based on its chemical properties, does an opposite position. That's why it's good for thermometers, right? Because in thermometers, you read the top of the line in your thermometer. So mercury is a good solution for that, or a good liquid to use for thermometers. At least it used to be. Now we use alcohol in the thermometers. Again, it doesn't form a meniscus that's curved that would throw people off in reading it. So this is an example of adhesion. The water sticks to the edge of the glass because water sticks to other surfaces as well. That's adhesion. And it's all about hydrogen bonds. Okay, so when you think of water and its stickiness and its surface tension, which is at the surface tension, it kind of sticks to itself, and those water bugs can move across. That's because of hydrogen bonds. Weak bonds, but very important bonds. Again, if we look at how water moves up through the roots, what would it be? It has to go up through these cylinders, these water conducting cells, so it has to stick to the edge of the water conducting cells. That's adhesion. But then the water sticking to itself, so as water is leaving through the leaves, more water is pulled up to the leaves through the stems through cohesion, where water is sticking to itself. So we have adhesion, cohesion, very important because the water comes from the soil, but it's needed in the leaves because water is an important part of photosynthesis. So you don't water your leaves, right? You water the soil in the summertime to get the water to the roots. So again, we talked about the ability of water to kind of moderate temperature. So it has what we call a high specific heat, which just means that it takes a lot of energy applied or removed to change its state of matter from solid to liquid and vice versa. Because it expands, like we said, ice floats in water. And we wouldn't want ice to sink. You know, if it didn't expand, its density would be higher and then it would drop to the bottom. So we know ice cubes float. Do you ever put ice cubes in pure grain alcohol? It sinks to the bottom because water and alcohol are two different chemicals and they have different properties. So water, solid water in liquid water always floats. Ice always floats. And it moderates that temperature down below too, like I said, so it's not as cold down deep. So again, it's all about hydrogen bonds. So we talked about covalent bonds, sharing ionic bonds, transferring from one point to another, and then hydrogen bonds, which are the weakest. Hydrogen bonds also are what holds together the DNA ladder. Remember, the DNA ladder has two strands. That's what holds the two sides together. So this is looking at chemical equations. So chemical equations is just the process of bringing atoms together and forming bonds. So for example, when we form water, we take hydrogen gas with oxygen gas, forming water. And water comes in water vapor, solid liquid water, and solid water is ice. So photosynthesis is an important chemical reaction that we're going to talk about this semester. We're going to analyze that equation to death. And people know the basics of photosynthesis, right? It's making energy from the sun. Plants get energy from the sun and use it, and then they're at the base of the food chain. We're going to add a lot more detail to this equation, but you should know the general equation, which is carbon dioxide and water forms what is this? Glucose and oxygen gas, right? So carbon dioxide is a gas from our exhale. Water in the environment reassembles to form glucose and oxygen gas. So if we count the number of carbons on the left side and compare them to the carbons on the right side, we have to add these big numbers in front, called coefficients in front. But what do we get? On the left side of the arrow, how many carbons are there? How many carbons? 6. So the big 6 applies to everything after it. So there's 6 carbons on the left, 6 carbons on the right, correct? Everybody agree with that? If I look at oxygen, there's 6 times 2, 12 oxygen, plus another 6 on the left side there too, right? How many oxygen is that total? So we've got 6 times 2 is 12, plus another 6 is 18. How does that compare to this side? We have 6 plus 12 is 18, right? And then if I look at carbon, we already said that, 6 and 6, right? So we didn't lose any atoms. When we form chemical equations, the atoms just break apart and reassemble in a different way. So that's called the law of conservation of mass, or conservation of matter for that, because matter has mass. And energy is neither created or destroyed, it simply changes form. Conservation of energy, too, is another way to describe that. So we're just reassembling things, breaking down and forming new bonds. We do that in our digestive tract, right? Every time you eat something, you break it down into its bits and pieces, and then your cells reassemble it into more important things. Like a peanut is what major type of molecule that we eat in our diet? Sugar, fat, or protein? Mostly protein, right? So you bring that protein in, your digestive tract breaks it down into the bits and pieces of protein. What are proteins made of? Do you remember that from your science class? What is it? Yeah, amino acids. So your digestive tract breaks that down into amino acids. Those amino acids are absorbed into your bloodstream, they enter your cells, and then they're reassembled as new proteins like insulin or collagen that makes up our bone and ligaments and skin structure. So all these chemical equations are just reassembling atoms. So another type of chemistry concept that we should understand that we're going to be testing in lab this week is acid and base. When you talk about the concept of acid and base, acids simply are a measurement of hydrogen ion concentration. So the higher the concentration of hydrogen ions, the lower the number. So if we look at this diagram on the bottom of the page here, when water breaks up into its ions, okay, when it breaks up into ions, we form an H3O plus and an OH minus. We can predict which one gained and lost an electron based on its charge, right? So when it breaks up into its, so it has, we said that it's polar covalent, right? So it's slightly charged. So that's why we see this difference in charge here in a liquid environment. We see some of these ions. So water can act or contribute to, plays a role, I should say, in acid-base reactions. So there's equal number of positive and negative. So those ions, that extra hydrogen ion on that hydronium ion is what contributes to acidity. But with pure water, there's equal numbers, so that what is the pH of pure water? 7, yeah, if you remember that. The pH scale goes from 0 to 14. So the more hydrogen ion we have in a solution, like I said, the lower the number, and I'll show you why that is. So we said they're equal in pure water, so the pH is 7. Water has a pH of 7. But if I add some other molecule or compound that has more H plus or OH minus, like a hydroxide, anything that is OH, like sodium hydroxide, that is going to add more of the OH portion, which is going to make it more basic. If I add something like hydrochloric acid, HCl, that has extra H attached to it, that's going to increase this part, and I'm going to have an acidic solution. So this pH scale, the reason why the pH is lower if we have more acidic properties and more hydrogen ion is if we look at how the hydrogen ion concentration is, this 3 comes from 10 to the negative 3. So if I look at the pH scale and I say the hydrogen ion is 1 times 10 to the negative 3, how would I convert that to a decimal? 10 to the negative 3. I take my 1, and I got to go 3 places to the left. 1, 2, 3. Drop a decimal point. So 10 to the negative 3 is the same as 0.001. What is 1 times 10 to the negative 2? 0.01. So if I'm looking at the numbers 0.001 and 0.01, which is bigger? 0.01. So 10 to the negative 2 has a higher concentration of hydrogen ions than a solution which is 10 to the negative 3, right? So that's where this pH comes from. So 10 to the negative 3 means I have a pH of 3. 10 to the negative 2 means I have a pH of 2. What's the difference between a solution with a pH of 3 and a pH of 2? How many times more acidic are they? Because these numbers here are based on factors of 10, aren't they? So I would say a pH of 3 is 10 times less acidic than a solution with a pH of 2. Because if something has a pH of 1, it's 1 times 10 to the negative 1, right? So what's the concentration? 0.1. And if I have a pH of 0, the concentration is 1, right? If I have a pH of, because it's always the exponent. So if we look at these numbers on the pH scale, it's the exponent of my hydrogen ion concentration. So 10 to the negative 7, if that's what the hydrogen ion concentration is, the pH is 7.